being here. My name is Alan Robinette. I'm the librarian here at Champion Christian College, and it is my pleasure to do now the 5th book release for my good friend, Miss Ashlyn Ohm. Ashlyn's first book, which we have multiple copies of here, yes, is can I say it's still my favorite?
You can say that.
Okay.
I know it is.
I love them all. It's like children. But her first book is a devotional that follows throughout the year. So if you're reading week 10 of the devotional, you're in week 10 of the year, you can follow it throughout. And it ties her love of nature with her spirituality, and it is a beautiful read. I recommend that one highly. As do I recommend the book that we have to talk about tonight, which is your new poetry book, which I don't want to get the title wrong. High Country Hymnal, Poems for the Mountains, the Valleys, and the In-Between. And so we're going to learn a whole lot more about that book this evening and what inspired Ashlyn to write it. So again, thanks, Sarah. I'd love to see a full house. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We are streaming on Facebook tonight. Please take care of Allison, who has kept the Kapachi Cafe open late for us. So please take care of her, and let's go ahead and get started. This is a different kind of book for you.
It is, yes.
You just finished a trilogy.
Yes,
where you
a
had
fiction trilogy.
Right, with 4 central characters who grew and learned, and that's kind of an external character. This is a very internal, very personal book. Tell me, when did you start writing poetry, and what draws you to poems?
I've written poetry off and on for the whole course of my writing career. I've written poetry sometimes for different people, for different events, sort of just here and there, sporadically. But this was the first time that I really began to seriously produce poetry that, I knew was going to trend toward publication. So, yes, this was not only a shift in direction for my writing, it was a big change for me and a big change from what I'm used to in creating a book.
Can you see the evolution of your poetry from maybe when you were a teenager writing poetry through to now?
Yes.
How has it evolved?
I think it's become a lot more, I would say, grounded. More introspective, probably. I think that there are places that I'm willing to go now and things that I have a better grasp of exploring that I didn't then. My poetry before, I feel like, was very externally focused. It was, like I said, for events, for places, for specific outward, objects, places, moments. But this was very personal and very much coming from within me instead of having that outward-looking focus.
And poetry can be and should be very personal. But reading through the poems and reading through the book, you found a way to take something very personal and translate it to a broader audience. How hard was that?
I think that the rules that apply to fiction apply to poetry too, which is that people relate to very basic human experiences, emotions. They relate to the heart of a person. And it's sort of, fiction writers are often told to write to a specific person, to have a person in mind as your audience. And when you write to the one, you reach the many, because what is personal and focused and delivered for one person resonates with a lot of people. If you try to write very broad, it becomes a mile wide and an inch deep, and no one is reached. So I think obviously there's a balance for poets between this is just my diary, and but you have to be willing to explore the things that you're feeling in a way that allows people to say, oh yeah, I felt that too. Maybe about different circumstances, different situation, but the same type of emotion.
So they can hopefully see themselves in the verse in the same way. Was that frightening?
Oh, yes.
I mean, you're basically opening up your diary to the world in some ways, right?
Exactly,
not that personal, but fairly personal.
You take your heart out and you let it run laps around the room.
Right.
No, it is.
That kind of transparency really does take a level of confidence and bravery, and
all writing involves risk. And if you're not willing to take that risk of authenticity, of vulnerability,
to that.
Yeah, you cannot get to that place unless you're willing to take that risk.
Right.
But yes, a poetry book is even more, personal than a novel. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, let's follow up on that a little bit. Instead of talking about poetry in general, talk about this book specifically. I know it touches on a lot of themes. Of course, your spirituality.
Yes.
Your affinity for the higher places, Colorado, and some of the travels.
Which is something that will shock everyone
Yeah.
who's ever read anything like it.
Right. Talk about the influences. What specifically inspires you, and what helps you connect your love of nature with your spirituality and with poems and the poetic form?
Right. Well, what comes to mind, it's again, it goes back to writing fiction. Good writing is good writing, no matter what format you put it in. There have been so many authors, writers, influences who have inspired me. Obviously, first would be my mom, who homeschooled me, who taught me how to write, who always pushed me to that next level of knowing that this was what I wanted to do and it needed to be done with excellence, and always encouraged me in that way.
I hear she's a pretty good editor too.
She is a very good
Okay.
editor. Yes.
You're welcome.
That's the rumor. Yeah. The rumor is she's a good editor.
Rumor.
Not that I would know.
No.
But authors, you've heard me say this before. I'll say it again. I'll say it till I die. Madeline L'Engle.
Yes.
I will always go
Yes.
back to her writing. Just the way that she was very courageous in exploring, the fringes of faith.
And she doesn't waste a word.
No, she doesn't. She's
Every
very
word is
concise.
intentional.
Yes.
Right.
She has beautiful sections in her writing that I would consider poetry. Even though she's writing prose, she still takes these breaks to deliver some poetry. In fact, one of her books, A Swiftly Tilting Planet, was built around a poem. So that book was, constructed around the rune and the specific words and phrases that were used. So she always inspires me in my writing. And another person I would say would be Anne Voskamp, who, as
You've mentioned her,
know,
yes.
writes with a very poetic style. The style of it is, you always want to make each word have weight and each word work for you. In a poem, in a novel, you have 100,000 words to get across a specific feeling, an emotion, an experience. In a poetry book, you have, as much.
Limitations.
You have to encapsulate what you're trying to say into a much smaller picture, and you have to make every word count.
I think that's the challenge and the beauty of poetry.
Yes.
Now, you can have long form poetry,
Right,
free
yes.
writing basically, but especially a poem that has meter and structure and definition, and you have to make sure that that it's not just a poem because the two words at the end of the stanza rhyme, right? I mean, you have to have that consistency throughout. Well, let's talk a little bit about one of your poems, because Ashlyn let me select the 3 poems that we're going to read tonight. I am so pleased that she did. And the first one I selected was Walking West, which is does allude to your love of nature and your love of all things Colorado.
And this was actually the first poem that I wrote for this book.
I did not know
So
that.
it's not the first poem in the book, but it was the first one that I wrote for this collection. So,
Well, there we go.
Walking West. I will be walking west all my life. I will come here until I have learned the land like a dance I do not lead. Until I have mastered the intricate steps. How to catch the clouds on my shoulders and ripple through the rain. How to let the light in without fear and kindle the alpenglow against the night. How to rise on hawk wings and carve circles over the ground bound. How to stand with patient peaks and trust the long, slow knowing of eternity. And before all, how to cup courage in my hands and hold fearless face to the west. But until then, until false steps no longer dim the dance, I will come here, to the place of power, the gate of glory, soul catching sun like a prism, heart leaping high like a pine, spirit pointing skyward like a peak, who trusts the granite below and the grace above.
That is beautiful. That is a beautiful poem. I'm glad I chose that.
Yes, credit.
Absolutely. So, talk a little bit about Estes Park and what draws you to that and what moves your spirit when you do look west.
Yes. So you'll have to cut me off because I could talk about Estes
Okay,
Park
all right.
all night. But
I was told we had 5 hours for this.
oh well,
so, yeah.
that still might not be enough time. No. If you've read any of my other writing, you know how much I love the mountains, especially the Rockies. That is absolutely the home of my heart, and in fact, my fiction books are set partially in Estes Park and sold in the bookstore there. And I find it's much easier for me personally to feel God and hear God and speak to God in the mountains. I think we all have some place that's like that for us. You know, maybe for some of us it's the ocean, it might be the desert, it might be the prairie. All of us have some place where we just feel much closer to God and through His creation. And for me, that's the mountains. And so when I think about my relationship with God, I think about the mountains. When I think about the mountains, I think about God. They are very much intertwined for me. And mountains and God and writing are kind of that threefold cord that are, you know, each a part of each other, and a part of how I explore the others and interact with the others is through those things. So I think, you know, it was very helpful for me to be able to process and celebrate the feelings of, you know, how I find God in the mountains and how I feel about the mountains because of God. And I was able to really just celebrate all of that in this book, as well as explore in some of the poems what happens when you don't feel God, when you're in a place where you're in a valley and you're not in the mountains, or you're not in that season where you can hear His voice very well, and what do you do then? You know, I have some of those in here too.
Which I inferred from the subtitle.
Yes,
right?
yes. Poems for
read-
the mountains, the valleys, and the in-between.
Right. Which is obviously more than just geography.
Yes.
May I ask when you wrote that poem? How old you were when you wrote that poem?
This last one?
The last one that you read? Yeah, because you
Yes.
said that was the first one that you
Yes,
read for
it was
this.
the first one I wrote for this, and I wrote that, I believe, yes, 2 years ago, about 2.5 years ago.
Okay, because I didn't know if this was a lot of times a poetry book, an anthology that comes out is kind of a greatest hits collection.
Yes.
Right? It's what I've written over the last 15 years, right? But this is a slice of life that is more of a recent thing. Okay. I think I asked you this about your fiction work as well, but how do you know when a work is complete? Because a poem can be any length in a lot of ways. A sonnet has to be 14
Right,
lines.
yes,
A haiku has to be. But a lot of long-form poetry can be any length you want it to be.
Right.
How do you know, okay, nailed it, got it?
This is just an author secret.
Oh.
You never feel like it's done. Ever. At no time do you feel like, oh, it's great. It's
I feel so
perfect.
much better.
I feel so much, yeah.
None of my stuff is done.
At no point do I look at anything I wrote and go, wow, nailed it. You know, I always have that tug of, oh, but that little word there, I could tinker with this.
The meter doesn't
exactly.
quite.
Yeah. And finally, at some point, you just have to say, okay, you know, this is what I have to offer, and you trust that whatever you left incomplete or unfinished, or whatever you wished you could have said better, or whatever you're just not quite sure, you have to trust that grace comes and, you know, is poured very abundantly over your work. You know, I think every Christian artist, author, anyone who does creative work as a Christian struggles with, I want this to be right. And you have to trust that grace is coming to saturate that work.
And to not let, I can't remember who said it, but don't let perfect be the enemy of good,
Yes,
right?
absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
Because
Which is also a good way to live life.
right.
But how do I practically know when it's done? Just
when the cover arrives.
no, I can't make you change it up. But now it's done now. So I won't change it again. So once the inventory is printed, it's done. But no. For writing poetry especially, I think a poem is done, or as close to done as it can be, when it has encapsulated the full emotional journey. You know, you start, you kind of take the reader of the poem on this emotional arc, and if you started here and you took them here, you want to land them here.
Right.
As long as you did, and we're here now, it's done. Now, will you continue? You know, will I continue to go back and play with words and meter and try to, yes, absolutely. But it's done when has completed the art, I would say.
Okay. Well, kind of following on that, speak to the person who maybe feels like they want to write something, whether it's a long-form poem or a short story or a novel or whatever, and maybe they feel a little intimidated, right?
Yes.
I can't do that. I'm not good enough with words. I don't know enough words. I'm not, I'm not erudite, and I don't know all these fancy words and things. I don't know where to start. What would you say to somebody who wants to express themselves in the written form?
Well, I think obviously you must start by, getting several advanced degrees and memorizing 2 dictionaries. I mean, is there any other way? No.
I already took that for granted. What else?
Yeah, of course. That really goes without saying. But no. I think that people are so often turned off by poetry, or like you said, intimidated by it. Like, oh, it's a poem. Now it's classy. It conjures, images
fancy.
of, very like medieval libraries.
Shakespearean prose and
yes, very scholarly people, looking at it with their glasses. Yes, no. That is yes.
I'm here to help. Visual aid.
No, I think that poetry, I think that's very sad that poetry is so often construed as, it's this elite, untouchable, holy thing. Because really poetry, I would say, is the most approachable form of writing there is. I mean, anyone can write a poem. I have seen poems that were one word, that were, gripping poems, one word.
Sure.
I have seen poems that were poems because of the way the words were arranged and spaced even on the page, visual poetry. I have seen, there is nothing you can do with words that can't be a poem. I mean, it's amazing the flexibility of poetry, the accessibility of it, and there's really nothing like it that can help you process what's in your heart. Even if you don't write poems to be read by others or poems to, be published anywhere, it's just such a great tool for helping you deal with your own emotions. That's why the Bible is full of poetry. I mean, what did David do when he was struggling with trials and betrayal and really rough, heavy emotions? He wrote poems, and he could have done any kind of sacrifice or different form of worship, but he chose, that was how he connected with God and how he dealt with his experiences. So my advice for someone wanting to write poetry is just write. Just write how you're feeling and see what comes out, and then try to make it have the emotion you want it to have. Do you want it to rhyme? Because it doesn't have to. Do you want it to feel happy? Do you want it to feel sad? Do you want it to feel questioning? You get to choose. This is something that you and God get to create together, and there's no wrong way to do it. You can, really you can do anything, and it's just such a healing practice, and it's a very, very accessible practice. There are no rules.
Those are 2 good words for it, or at least in my experience writing poetry, very cathartic.
Yes.
Because you get to write something down, and then you go back and you reread it, and you think about it in a different way, and maybe it allows you some introspection, and it has been magical for me. But not all poems are very serious and very, in deep. One of the poems I chose for tonight, I chose just because it's fun, and it's called First Hike. And I read that one, and I thought, oh, not only do I really enjoy this, but I want to hear Ashlyn read it. So
that's really, you wanted the theatrical experience.
I did. I wanted the whole experience.
Okay, this is First Hike. Is it easy? Oh yes. It's a quite gentle climb. Yes, of course we'll go slowly since it's your first time. How far is it? Oh, perhaps 3 miles or 4. Maybe a bit less, but probably more. Watch your step there. Oh, so you actually fell? Yeah, that's how you learn to keep eyes on the trail. Hotter today than they said it would be, but he can't stop hikers like you and like me. I hope you brought plenty of water to drink. What? Left it behind? But didn't you think? Oh hey, look right there. Do not step in that. That's what is politely referred to as scat. Now, this part right here is just slightly steep, and don't lose your balance. That chasm is deep. Is this not exciting? Aren't you having fun? But why do you sound like you might burst a lung? Watch out for snakes, bears, and spooks. Yeah, they're real. Have you heard of the disappeared man in these hills? Well, look at that. Bear tracks, and pretty fresh, too. Don't worry, he's probably not searching for you. The view will be worth it. And what's that you say? Are we there yet? Well, we're almost halfway. Oh, yeah, that's 4 miles up one way. Didn't I mention? Was an 8-miler not your intention? Now, at the end is a rock scramble. Hold on real tight. And right there's the summit, a marvelous sight. Well, the views aren't the best. It's too cloudy today. But the joys in the journey, now wouldn't you say? All right, catch your breath. That's not half bad, my friend. Take photos, and now we'll do all this again.
I loved that one. I did. There's lots of really good poetry in there, very spiritual, very deep, and I loved that one. That just, I thought it was funny. And one of the things that we touched on a little bit earlier, it's if you're doing a metered poem and you're subscribing to the meter of a poem, you can't just rhyme the last 2 words.
No.
Right?
No.
I mean, all right, catch your breath. That's not half bad, my friend. Take photos, and now we'll do all this again. Da-da-da-da-da. You know, it's iambic pentameter, or it's whatever.
And it did that by itself. You understand that?
Of course it did. Yeah. No effort at all. No, throughout. You know, there's ways that you can rearrange words.
Yes.
And there are certain 3-syllable words that won't fit in this context because the accent is on the wrong
syllable. Yes.
Or the emphasis is on the wrong syllable, as I've heard people say. It's a thing to write good poetry doesn't just happen. It is a concerted effort. That's not to diminish what you said before, which is just right.
Yeah.
Right? You know, what you're writing is yours and it belongs to you, and what you've written is beautiful and belongs to you. And so just do that. But to come up with something like that, you know, even a fun poem like that, I wanted to point out, has very good structure and meter and form and syllabic content. I'm a fan. I'm a fan. So tell me a little bit about what frustrates you with the English language.
Everything. No, English is one of the most weird languages on earth, and it's because we've done so much borrowing. You know, the English language is a melting pot. It has taken words from so many other languages, so many other cultures. It's very much wearing a lot of hats, and so when it brings in borrowed words, borrowed structures, those all carry the grammatical rules of the original language, and pronunciation rules and spelling rules, which, you know, all make great sense in that language, and not so much when these words are just ripped out and put in English. But it can be, you know, frustrating because most other languages are much more structured, much more, you know, I don't want to say rigid, but sort of, a lot less words that don't fit real well in different places.
And if you don't realize that, try teaching English
Yes.
to somebody who is a
Yes.
native Spanish speaker
Yes.
or a
Yes.
native.
And you will quickly realize all the inconsistencies and all the contradictions of English.
Because they'll point them out and go, that doesn't
Yes.
make sense, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it doesn't. They're right. It doesn't.
They're right.
It doesn't make sense.
But that's also part of the beauty of the language.
Yes.
And to me, finding the right word.
Well, it's 2 sides of the same coin. There's also the joy of, because we have borrowed from so many cultures and so many languages, there are so many words at our disposal that are very fun and, you know, can be just unusual enough that when a reader encounters them in a poem, it's you know, it's a surprise a little bit, and it fits very well. There's a lot of very evocative words in English. There's a lot of ways that specific turns of phrase can carry a lot of emotional weight. And so that I do love, and I love exploring kind of the odd connections between words that are maybe common to us but came from somewhere else, and words that, you know, we might not use on a daily basis, especially to complete a rhyme or to complete the syllable rhythm. That's very satisfying to me when I can find that perfect cap right there.
When I'm reading Ashlyn's book, I have a thesaurus here and a dictionary here, and that way when I come across a word I don't know, which is twice a page, I can go through and say, okay, what does that mean? What is this?
He's making it sound scarier than it is.
It's not scary. It's wonderful. It's beautiful poetry. Beautiful poetry. You talked a little bit earlier about finding poetry in Scripture. What have been some of your favorite poems that have come out of Scripture? Or some of your favorite passages that have come out that you find poetic?
Well, I think what would immediately just come to mind, off the top of my head, is Romans 11, the doxology in Romans 11. The depth of the richness of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are His judgments, His ways past finding out. There is so much poetry to that, that kind of rises and builds. Just the recitation of it and the saying of it and the rhythm of it as it's translated to English gives that sense of just building awe and wonder at the glory of God. And so much more of the Bible is poetry than people realize. Colossians has that beautiful early Christian hymn that is basically poetry that we lose a bit of the sense of when it's translated, but still,
right.
Christ being before all things, the head of all things, and in Him all things consist. There's so much poetry in Scripture, and I think it's very meaningful and very valuable for us to realize that clearly God was not interested in just giving us a book that told us everything we needed to know. The end. He wanted to give us a very beautiful book. He wanted to give us a book that had His heart for beauty and creation and rhythm and song. He wanted to give us His joy in the making of things and the language of things, because language was His gift to us. And so God doesn't just, put down in black and white, oh, this is what you need.
Instruction manual,
yes,
right?
It's not
right.
an instruction manual. It's not
Connect A to B.
Yeah, exactly. It's very beautiful. It's very poetic. It's very lyrical, because that's the heart of God.
Okay, well that's a very good lead into the last poem that I wanted you to read, actually, which is Testimony, which is one of the first poems that is in the book. And I thought it was beautiful, so please.
21 I was, tripping over untested trails, still afraid to bleed and weep and pray. It was the gentle hands of grace that stopped my stumble, opening a door I had not seen in my wall. I could say more about it, the way I wept like a rescued rebel when I saw the land, the way I ran heart whole and joy strong over glacial fields, the way I shed my shuffling doubts behind the alpen glow and knew that my soul was sown to this place, these peaks, this presence. That's the story. Now my trails have run like rivers through a future all yet unmapped then, but still I remember the place where my hope first hovered. These mountains are steady, and so is my compass. I return and return and return.
It's gorgeous. That really is pretty. It's a beautiful, beautiful poem. So, I always ask what's next. What are you working on now? Wait, before I forget, there are a couple of things. Obviously, you'll still be signing books afterwards, but there's also a sign-up form for Ashlyn's blog.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about Words from the Wilderness, because I want people to know what they will get when they sign up for that.
So there is a sign-up form to receive my emails, my newsletter, my blog. I send out newsletters once a month, unless there's something really thrilling happening, like, I don't know, a book release, then you might get an extra email.
For the low, low price of
free.
Free, right.
I put things in my newsletters that I don't put anywhere else. So you'll find my blog posts, which deal with nature and God, finding Him in seasonal things that are happening. I also have a bunch of short stories, other poetry, some of which is not even in this book, and also access to, if you haven't read my novels, when you sign up for my newsletter, you can read the first 4 chapters of those, as well as just some backstory scenes from those, and just extra bonus content from those that didn't, make it into the book or was a supplement to those.
I hope you'll pick up a book, but if you don't, please sign up for the blog. It really is a gift that you get once a month. It's a good read. So, so that being said, what are you working on now? You've had a devotional that I've already extolled the virtues of. You've had the trilogy
Yes.
that was really difficult to finish, I would guess,
Yes.
because you had to
Yes.
say goodbye to these characters
Right.
that you
Yes.
loved. For how long did it take to write the trilogy?
The trilogy was a work of 6 years.
6 years. So these are people that you came to know and love,
Right.
and in Brian's case, not so much. but yeah,
There's your spoiler.
Yeah.
You got it in there.
yeah. Wow, I didn't I? I have to spoil something at some point.
Yeah.
Snuck it in at the end. So what are you working on now?
Well, as you said, you know, it is hard to say goodbye to characters that you've loved for 6 years, and I am really bad at saying goodbye. So,
Oh, this is such good news.
so I'm working on a spin-off series from the original trilogy.
Ooh, which characters?
I'm not telling
Oh,
you.
come on.
No.
Give me one.
Avery.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Oh, good. Anybody who's read the trilogy knows
If
Avery
you finished the trilogy, you may have known this was coming because you probably picked up on some kind of unfinished loose threads
was
that I
hoping.
left near the end of book 3, and they were for this reason. So I am, yes, currently working on that. But that is still formless and void, but
Okay.
it's getting there,
Okay.
and it's something that is very near to my heart. This is going to be a story that I hope is very impactful.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming out.
Thank
Please, if you
you.
haven't had a book yet, please join Ashley at the table. Or if you just have any questions or things you want to bounce off, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.